feel like Gordon Bombay would have taken his career to even further heights.
Everything's flashy, everything's cocaine, everything's
Fun. Open wide for some soccer.
I don't care what you think about what your personal thoughts are at home. I care that you hate the Cowboys.
Call this college rule.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Sports Experience Podcast. I'm Chris. This is Dom. Just a couple of comics talking sports. Who we talking about today?
We are back to skateboarding and talking about the other part of a skating almost rivalry in the 80s, Christian Hosoi.
Well, we just had an episode about Tony Hawk, if you want to go check that one out. And we were talking about these two guys' careers being parallel until they're not. And
until they're very not.
That's what I feel like Hosoi is. And I feel like he fits into our Sports Experience Podcast of sometimes you're just like, what if? Because we saw his... absolutely ripping style, and then it kind of drops off, and we'll get into that.
Like, there's a fork in the road. Tony Hawk goes one way. Christian Hosoi goes in the opposite direction.
Yep. No, it's sad. So
Christian Hosoi, born October 5th, 1967. His dad is from Hawaii. His mom is Caucasian, and he grew up in Los Angeles and the great state of Hawaii.
Yeah, he said he would go back and forth, sometimes spend 6 months in Hawaii, and then most of his time was spent growing up in California.
Yeah, which, growing up in California during this era, there's a skating culture there. And at about 7, 8 years old, he finds himself into it because of what his dad does as an occupation.
Well, his dad is the manager at a skate park.
Yeah.
So he pretty much is indoctrined into being a skater, especially with the people that he was hanging out with. So he's hanging out in this Dogtown era. And I thought it was very interesting because that is straight up surfing. Like the Dogtown guys, they're just surfers who would skate when
the brakes aren't any
good.
The
brakes aren't good. And Christian said he always hated surfing because he was like, I don't want to surf on the waves time. I want to surf with my friends with music playing in the daylight. Like
the skate park's always there.
And the skate park's always there.
Take that, Mother Nature.
That's literally what I feel like drove him to just be at the skate park all day.
Yeah, and he's with such influential people, and they're encouraging him to do this at a young age. Just like, this is the coolest thing ever, and I get to come here every day.
Well, he grew up with Tony Alva, Stacy, watching these guys, and what he said was like how he borrowed his style, and who really taught him was Shogo, who was another Asian American, which he looked at as being like, oh shit, somebody like me is doing this.
That was like an idol. That was like, this is who I can look up to.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he pretty much taught him how to hit the giant pools, or he told him not to pull off. So when you're going up on a pool, you feel like you need to pull off and back into a jump. And he was just like, no, it's just going to guide you exactly where you need to go.
Your momentum carries you.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought, that was pretty interesting when they were talking to Shogo about, when he was a little kid and teaching him all this stuff.
Yeah. Like literally he was like 8, 9 years old and he was just like, hell yeah, little ripper, especially because his dad was just like hanging out with all these guys, smoking weed, which we'll get into later. Because that's kind of what his dad was. He was kind of like a party guy that would hang out at the skate park that became like the manager.
Yeah. So that's pretty sweet. He was a natural though.
That's
when he first started. Like he didn't have kind of that. He had the drive and mentality to do it, but it came much more natural to him than Tony Hawk. It seems like all the tricks that he did, and just he was more physically capable of pulling this stuff off, and he did it with style.
Well, people said that it looked like he surfed all morning and then got on a skateboard. That's what his style looked like. But really, that's just how he learned how to skate from these guys who surfed all the time.
Yeah, it was just a style that he had picked up and not necessarily perfected, but he made it cool. He made it exciting to watch. It wasn't technical. It was free-flowing.
Yes, he was very, very free-flowing, very, like we said, like surf style, just style for days is what people are saying, because that's just how he came up, which was, like we said, was so different than Tony, which was his was not associated with that. It was more tech style.
Yeah, laser focused.
Mm-hmm.
In 1979, he was an amateur and sponsored by Powell Peralta. but he left after they didn't let him go pro.
Well, he was one of the original members of the Bones Brigade, which we've talked about and we'll talk about again. And at 12 years old, him and his dad felt like he should be turning pro. So Stevie Caballero just turned pro, and I believe he was 13, and he was like, I'm that good. Like,
I'm a hard 12.
Well, he was saying that. He was just like, I'm getting top 3 in these amateur contests every single time. There's no reason for me not to go and be pro because, and this is what we were saying, was a lot of these amateurs were actually better than pros at this time because they had made these leaps that pros were not making.
Well, they were inventing new tricks and they were inventing a new kind of style.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's why he was just like, how am I not turning pro right now? So he ends up quitting Bones Brigade, which he said was both awesome and probably one of the stupider things that he did because it kind of made him be more independent.
Yeah, but it also opened the door for Tony Hawk to join him, right?
That's right. So Tony Hawk ends up taking his spot on the Bones Brigade, which then we'll see that, listen to that episode.
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
So he ends up going with Dogtown.
Yeah.
Which was his hometown skate shop, and he was into it. He was just like, I want to have my pro board come out on this. His dad sketched up a design of like a couple of samurai swords with a Dogtown cross and his name across it.
His dad was an artist, actually.
His dad was a fantastic artist. That was something that him and his dad would have these conversations about skateboarding being an expression of yourself and it being like an art form more than like, different sports. So he said they used to have these deep conversations all the time about what, skating meant. And that's what he wanted his first board to come out on Dogtown. He was on them for a month. And then one of the only pros that was on it, I forget what his name was, he saw him skating a Madrid board. And he's like, why are you skating a Madrid board? He's like, Ian, here, Dogtown closed like 3 weeks ago.
Whoa.
And it was like literally right after they were like, we're going to make you pro. All right, we're going to have to file for Chapter 9 because we are in bankruptcy.
Ruh-roh.
So that's literally how it happened. And this was before communication was at its premium. So like he didn't even get a call. It was just kind of like
word of mouth. You find out
we're done.
It's like you've been traded to the Mets.
So he ends up going with the Sim skates.
Yeah.
As soon as he gets on Sim skates, they get sold to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And he says that what he thought leaving Bones Brigade at 12, in the next 6 months, he was going to have a pro model.
Yeah.
He didn't get his pro model released until he was 14.
Yeah, 1981 is when he joined Sims.
So literally, I think Tony Hawk, who took his space on Bones Brigade, was a pro before him.
Yeah.
That's what's kind of crazy when you look at like the way that shit goes. But what is so iconic was through Sim Skates is we get this first Hosoi board with the rising sun.
Yep.
And that's what everyone was saying was just like that was so iconic, especially for Asian Americans who were getting into it. It was just like, oh, this is a board for us.
Here's a younger Shogo for us to kind of emulate and look up to. And it's very recognizable as a brand. So,
unfortunately, the relationship with Sim wasn't necessarily there. It was just kind of like when he joined them, it was just almost kind of like, yeah, I want someone to release my pro model.
Exactly.
It wasn't like it wasn't like Dogtown or Bones Brigade where like it had all this like rep that could be brought to it. It was almost just like, yeah, we have Hosoi on this one, he's like our one guy. So he ends up leaving Sim Skates and joining back up with Tony Alva.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they end up doing, so this is where Hosoi kind of changes the market, where every single board was the exact same. So it was all the exact same shape. And then he went to Alva and he was like, well, I really want like a hammerhead front.
Yeah, the hammerhead board.
So it's like and then the back was almost like a scoop fishtail back because he wanted to do tail taps and he couldn't do it on boards anymore because they were like being made different. And Alva had a diamond tail back. And it came completely apparent that Hosoi's design was better.
Yeah.
And Alva was pushing it like it was his design. And Hosoi said he was just like, so I quit that company. So like it was literally in the span of like 3 years.
He's like a nomad for all these teams.
He went through like 5 companies. And that's what people were saying was that next step was him to just do Hosoi skateboards.
Yeah.
Like it had to have been all on his own. And
he kind of comes to realize this too, because he's like, no matter what decision I make, it's not going to be my own or the company folds. It's like, if I'm going to make it, I have to do this all by myself or with my dad helping me almost.
And
like
that's
from the creative aspect.
Exactly. And that's when all the skateboards started to change their shape. They would call them money bumps, where like you would have just like a little in-carve in and people were like, oh, isn't that sick? And what was the truth was many of them were not functional outside of what he was kind of putting out. So Hosoi boards were like kind of like the premiere for a couple of years there, because everyone was just like, oh, that ride's so much smoother.
Yeah. He's definitely raking in the dough with it too at this point. And in these competitions, he's starting to kick ass.
Yes, this is when, and we've talked about this, where this is when these guys really start to mature and like fill out, and he starts to go higher than everybody.
He's like a naturally in shape dude and strong,
yes,
unlike the scrawny Tony Hawk, and he's able to pull off these moves with his own strength and creativity that people haven't seen.
Well, that's what people were saying, was he took what Tony Hawk was doing and ollieing out and showing up people like, oh, he can get 8 feet out of the bowl, which is like unthinkable 3 years prior. Yeah. Like you were literally just kind of going up and then like, woo, coming back down. And Hosoi's doing these front side airs that were mind boggling.
Yeah. What was it? The Christ air move. I always thought that was pretty sweet.
So this is when I feel like Christian Hosoi becomes Christian Hosoi, because his nickname becomes Christ.
Yeah,
that's like on magazines they'd be like, "Here comes Christ," and
Dash
then he invented the Christ air, where you take your board and you spread it out like that, and he was like literally one of the only people that could ever do it, because he was one of the only guys that could get enough air to get your board all the way back out all the way back down. The other big trick that he invented was the rocket air, which was both feet on the bottom, and because that was just his style, was just pure octane, it was just pure volume, and that's like what he was doing.
Smooth though,
so smooth.
Like it wasn't technical or robotic like you saw with Tony, which is no knock against him, but it wasn't like, it was just free flowing, and he developed quite the fan base from this.
Well, it was the two different styles of that era, which people said that Christian was all style and Tony was no style. Like you could see Christian do 6 frontside airs and be like, that was better than Tony. And Tony was doing 6 tricks back to back to back. But it was such a dichotomy in their styles that it was just like hammered home when he went so much higher than everybody else. And that's the thing about when the 540 came in, was McGill's 540, the McTwist, changed it to where when Hosoi did it, it was better than everybody's. And people still say he has the best 540. He almost like goes upside down and does a full somersault into his. And it was higher than everybody's. It was...
Tony was the steak, Christian was the sizzle.
Oh, man, I love that.
I mean, but that's what it was. That was what the scene was. That was what the fans came to see on either side of the spectrum.
So we get into 84-ish, and he starts to be blowing up. Because it's hard to kind of like convey what it was like to go to these skateboard contests and like see Christian, because he kind of is doing what guys are doing in the X Games, where like that's how high he's going kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think it was, my name is Earl's?
Jason Lee.
Jason Lee said, he goes, when Christian was on the ramp would shake. Nobody else would do this. When he would hit it, you could feel it like you were standing on it. It was almost like a small tremor would come through, just like, like that's how much energy he was putting into these gigantic airs. And he said that because, like we said, like him and Tony Hawk had this rivalry, but they had so much respect for each other that he would show up and be like, all right, let's see what Tony's doing now. I got to go that much higher, or I have to like maybe even put a couple of different kind of tricks
Extra
in. Like
trick in there too.
He said him and Tony were pushing the sport so much that it was hard to see a contest without each other, and that's when 85.
And those are just guys are just alternating wins, basically.
That's an 85. It's literally Tony and Christian, and this is where Christian becomes the rock star.
And let's just say, as influential, and he is probably the most influential skateboarder of all time, as you brought up Tony Hawk for it, Christian Hosoi brought the ladies to the skate park.
Well, I brought this up in the Hawk episode. In the late 90s, early 2000s, nobody was more influential than Hawk. In this era, it was almost like Christian had that mantle of being like, oh, no, here's the cool guy. If you're not really super into skating, this is what you want to watch. Because
Nerd!
He literally had the long-ass hair. He would never wear a shirt. He had, like, shirts.
He'd wear ladies' clothes and still look good.
He had, like, shirts tucked into his belt so it, like, flared out behind him. Like, he had
as many tied-off wristbands as Johnny Depp on a bender.
He had so much style that people said he had style to burn, and that was the difference between skateboarding in this era, where you either liked it to be tech or you liked it to be all style.
And you knew he was getting boy band ass.
Oh
at
my
that
God.
point of his life. Good God.
They went on this tour. They call it the Illegitimate Children's Tour. No. It was horrible. But that was the thing was, in this era, this is when so they all skated through the early 80s where you would make nothing.
Yeah.
85, money came in, and he was, I believe it was for 3 years, he was the highest paid skater by far.
And he was living the rock star lifestyle at that point. He had moved into Echo Park home in L.A. owned by W.C. Fields, and ramps and stuff like that in the backyard. I mean, it was just one big party.
Harleys, this was what was bad, and we'll talk about it later, why his dad...
Scott Baio went to his parties. Remember Scott Baio?
Well, why his dad was a great friend, but possibly a bad dad was they made the decision to not save any of this money. They're going to live it like he skateboards, which was 100%. They were just going to spend it until there was no more money to spend. They were going to rent houses instead of buy them.
Yeah. See,
it was very bad. It was like early NBA shit.
Yeah. On one hand, you can't take it with you. All right. But on the other, there's a thing called sensible financial planning.
Yes, which they were, and to their, not credit, but to their, I don't even know what it is, but
detriment.
Yes, they thought the money wasn't going to drop off the way that it did, even if it had dropped off.
Oh,
so like
80s mentality.
It was such a cocaine fueled. I'm not saying they were doing cocaine. I'm just saying the mentality of the 80s where it was like, no, we're going to make $500,000 every year. If it drops off, it's going to drop off by like 50,000. And it was such a bad drop off that, I mean, it's kind of unforeseeable.
It was like when Randy Marsh's boy band wasn't relevant anymore and he had to join Finger Bang. See ya!
Finger bang, bang you every night. But that's it. It was such a thing that they were on top of the world. Yeah,
they were going all over the world and introducing skating to people.
One of the best stories, I believe they were in Barcelona, and Christian was just like, I want to go buy leather jackets, because he was like sporting, it would be like year to year. One year he would be wearing like pink shit. The next year he'd be wearing like leather jackets, and like he was very fashion forward. And he went in and bought, because he had the Hosoi skate team at that point, and he was just like, he bought everybody leather jackets. And the other guys were like, yeah, we were all at the skate park, and then the Hosoi team showed up with a bunch of white leather jackets.
Oh my God.
We were like, what the fuck are you guys
like the
doing?
Scene in Dodgeball when they come out in the BDSM gear and fucking Jason Bateman's like, that's rad.
Fucking... He's introducing everybody. This is Blaze. This is Laser. This is Blazer. Like, literally, that's what it is. And the other thing that people were saying was because he pretty much took any Asian American skater under his wing who was serious. He was just like, you need to come and join us. He was like, their whole team started to look exactly like Christian.
Yeah, no, they were just little mini clones of him as far as the style, as far as the clothing, as far as the attitude almost.
Well, that's what they said. They were like, well, if you didn't want to be on Hosoi, you wouldn't dress like him. Like it was just
nobody in their right mind would wear these clothes without that kind of confidence.
Exactly.
Shall we say.
So we get into this dip. 88,
skating,
89. Street skating starts to come, and Christian is one of the first vert skaters to really take street skating for what it is and being like, oh, this is the new thing. I get it. So in 88, he was, I think, the first guy to ever win vert and street in the same time. Just to put it in perspective, like he definitely saw street skating for what it was, but everybody knew him as a vert skater. So his board sales dropped so hard that he went from making $500,000 in a year to making $1,500 in a month. And it happened so fast that there wasn't really anything they could do about it.
Yeah, and they weren't, squirreling some money away in case, disaster strikes either.
Exactly. So it was just quite a downward spiral where he had to pretty much sell everything that the 80s afforded him.
Yeah, and he's living a completely new and different lifestyle and starts hanging around some different people at this juncture.
Well, so before it gets bad, he goes to Venice. Mm-hmm. So there's this guy called Natas Campus who a lot of people say like started the street skating scene in Venice. And Venice, if anybody like 1990, that's like where street skating was kind of not invented, but like popularized. So like that's where everybody was doing the little jump ramps and just everything that street skating was the ollie, which Rodney was doing it for a decade. Just nobody fucking did it.
Nobody paid attention.
Exactly. But then Nada started doing it like up onto park benches and people were like, oh, okay. And that's when he moved to Venice and lived there for a couple of years and really got into this street skating scene.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason, he ends up moving to Huntington Beach.
Yeah.
And when he moved to Huntington Beach, because he was always a party guy, he was always a club guy, that was always throughout the 80s. I mean, Scott Baio came to his house.
I know.
mean, we're not just gonna blow over that. I mean, that was important, man.
Pauly Shore was there.
Alyssa Milano was in charge.
She was.
But
that's who's the boss.
That's who's the boss. Oh, shit. God damn it.
Same Guidos you can't understand. It doesn't matter.
Same Guidos. But that's the thing is, like, he was always this party guy. He goes to Huntington Beach.
But it never gets out of control. Like, it's a cheeky and fun shenanigans party in the 80s.
Well, what they were saying was he would skate all day. The partying wouldn't interfere with his skating.
Yeah.
He goes to Huntington Beach, and I believe it was called like the Chicken Bowl guys who the guys were, but they were really into the club scene and the drug trafficking that was happening in Huntington Beach. So they literally had just meth at the ready.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where the guy who introduced it to him, he was like, well, that was a mistake because like literally they did it, and he called him the next day and he was like, I want to buy a bunch of that.
Give me all the meth.
And
I'm sorry you didn't hear me. I want all of the meth that you have.
Well, that's the thing that he said was originally he was the guy that would do like a bump a day.
Bit.
Yeah, just a little bit, which everybody has the same fucking stupid story.
Yep.
They're just like, no, I was just doing a little bit, and then it kind of got out of control. They start a skateboard company called Focus. They might as well just called it methamphetamine.
Yeah.
I mean,
let's just call it Adderall.
And yeah, no, seriously. And they said that they got such a bad reputation of just not fulfilling orders. So like they would have overseas companies be like, okay, so we need 1,200 boards. They would get the money, party with it, and be like, I guess we're not sending out those boards.
Chris, you mean to tell me that meth heads are unreliable? I just can't believe that.
Just in this era
of
meth from when it was invented until now.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the only time that they were unreliable.
I don't know. It's just a small window of time.
I mean, in the greater scheme of things, the universe. So this is his real downfall. So this is across the board, skateboarders aren't making money.
No.
They took it to the streets and they kind of reinvented it. And that's the thing about when shit gets reinvented is like the money gets drained completely out. Nobody's making money. And he starts to get really spun out on meth.
Which never is a good thing.
Well, it goes from him doing maybe a line or two a day, and he said that there was a point where snorting it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Whenever that happens with a drug, that's not good.
Well, he said snorting it was like having a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. So it literally wasn't like shit to him, and that's when they made the decision. Was like, oh, we need to start smoking this, and that's when it really went off the rails.
Yeah.
While this is happening, he gets busted twice in 1995, both for possession.
Yeah, for like low-level possession too. I mean, these are like crimes that you can probably get diversion for.
Especially him.
If you just plead guilty
Yes.
and just walk away.
And his problem is he never follows up on a court case.
No.
Or he wasn't following up on these court cases.
Mistake number one, kids. Always go to your court dates.
Seriously, even if you're on meth.
Yeah, why not? You're there. You're present.
Was. Yes. And so he gets to this trip to go to Japan where they're going to do promo videos for this new thing that's going to happen on ESPN called
The Deuce.
Called
The Extreme Games.
And the person who sees the potential in this is Tony Hawk. And he's like, oh my God, this is going to be great. So they do a whole promo video with Tony. They get to Japan to do a promo video with Christian. And they quickly realize that he is incoherent. So he's just not making sense whatsoever with the shit he's talking about. They said his skin color was like gray. And
Ashy Larry.
He started to have what the meth face was, like the little holes in your face.
Meth mouth too, probably a little scotch of that.
So it was, and that's what people were saying. So there wasn't, I hate saying this, there wasn't the internet back then.
Yeah.
But from like 91 till 95, people hadn't seen Christian. And this was one of the first times that they had seen Christian, and they were like, yeah, that's cool, but who the fuck is this guy?
You're right.
Like, it literally was looking like a different person. He went from being like a model to being like a junkie. And that's what people were saying was, it was such a like jarring to see him like that. And Tony said when back in the day, you were always on Christian time. Even though we weren't associated with him, we would show up and he would show up an hour late. He would want to stay an hour after to fucking sign autographs. And he said, like, literally when they would go to get him for the demo in Japan, they would knock on his door and they wouldn't even be done knocking, and he would open it and they like go in and his bed would be made. He'd be like, okay, so you haven't slept. And he was he would like show up to the demo, and Tony was like, he wasn't skating whatsoever. He was just being a drug addict. Exactly. And then they did this whole promo to be like Hawk versus Hosoi back again, and it
never materialized because he never left Japan.
Well, and they didn't want to. They told him they weren't going to put it out because it looked so bad. He told them he wasn't going to go to the X Games. He didn't tell them this, but he said he wasn't going to go to the X Games because he felt like he was going to get arrested on his outstanding warrants, and he just stayed in Japan and got methed out more.
Yeah, he had a wealthy benefactor there that hooked him up, and he's just like, why would I do the Extreme Games with all the meth that I need?
And that's what really is sad, is right as skateboarding starts to explode again, a lot of people said that they were trying to get him to come to contest, and he would literally be like, I don't think I can get meth in that town, so I'm not going to go.
And he stayed underground because of the warrants once he got back to the States, too. So
he pretty much just disappears. Mm-hmm. And he disappears in this era of resurgence in skateboarding where he could have been one of the biggest.
He could have been one of the top people. And it's just like
the X Games were essentially made for his style too. Yeah. Like Tony at that point was a lot better and like probably still would have won a bunch, but like it just was. It would have been perfect for him, especially the best trick when they started doing that, and then like it really, like we were saying, like these two careers parallel, and then the fork goes in the road, and like everybody lost money in 1991, 1990. Like everybody's money disappeared. It's just he went down the drug road.
Yeah, the wrong path. And what are you going to do with that?
People were saying that he would show up to like a bowl with like meth tools, like a little filing thing. And like, because he wanted to, and this is what somebody said, which I thought was so accurate, that his drug psychosis took a point where he was just like, I got to get the next shape, because everybody was really into his shape in the 80s.
Yeah.
And like, so he'd be like carving shit on his thing. He'd just be like, no, like, we're here to skate, man. And like, that was such a...
Sir, that TV's not even on.
Well, that's such a thing that people were trying to tell him. They were just like, dude, the shape isn't the thing anymore. We all ride the Rodney Mullen fucking double scoop head.
Yeah.
Like, he had the shape down, and we're all doing that. There's no more hammerheads. There's no more fishtails. Like, and he just couldn't get that into his mind because he was so into this drug psychosis.
Yeah, it's just tragic. And it kind of all comes to a head for him, this lifestyle that he's leading, on January 26th, year 2000, so we're in the new millennium. He is arrested at Honolulu International Airport with crystal meth.
With 1.5 pounds, I believe, of crystal meth, so enough to be justified as distribution. And this is also not busted by state police.
No, these are feds.
It's busted by the federal police, which is, if anybody knows this about America's, it is 10 times worse to be busted by federal police than it is by state police. So like they were saying, if he was busted by state police, he probably would have been released on probation.
Yeah.
Even with his priors. With federal, it was 10 years minimum.
You are getting Uncle Slippy fisted by the federal government. And as some of you don't know, Hawaii is a very big meth state. So, yeah, probably intent to distribute for one last big score for poor Christian.
I hate to say this, but I'm pretty sure he was doing this a lot. Bringing meth into Honolulu. So they had an interview with his dad about whether he saw Christian the way he was, and he did, and he asked him if he was going to get off the meth and all of that kind of stuff. Like, it was obvious how bad he was on it. And then the interviewer asked him, his dad, it was just like, well, did you do meth with him? And he was like, yeah, we did meth together.
His dad was an enabler, man. That's like, it as good as he was to him, it's just like a messed up relationship.
I hate to say it, but it's almost the exact same with the money, where it's great that he was his friend and that they are so close, because they are. People in the skateboarding community were saying like nobody's closer than Christian and his dad. Like, but to their detriment, he needed somebody to step in and be like, hey, have some back end, because he was completely fucked up on meth and he ended up just doing meth with him.
Yeah,
it's literally some of the worst things you could do as a parent. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's it's hard to talk shit on other people,
right,
who are completely addicted to drugs. Mm-hmm. So it's just sad.
And since Christian didn't turn in any of the other people involved, that's when the hammer came down from the feds. Like, as if he had ratted, he probably would have done half the time.
Yep.
But he ends up getting 10 years?
Yep.
In federal prison. But while he's in prison, he has a literal come to Jesus moment.
Well, I want to say this, though, for the timing of it. Before we get into him turning his shit around, literally Tony Hawk does the 900, I believe, 6 months earlier.
Yep.
His game is released, I believe, 4 months earlier.
Oh, God.
And then Christian Hosoi gets busted with 1.5 pounds of meth and is told, you're going to be in jail for at least 10 years. Like, it was no question. Like, there's no like, yeah, they might go easy on you. It's just like, no, they don't go easy on you in federal court.
The federal government, and this is in an era where it's still just say no.
Yes.
Like,
literally, yes. And to what you were saying, Hawaii's dealing with a meth problem, and they're trying to curve that, and they're just like,
Dog the Bounty Hunter's trying to curve that.
And he did. I mean, come on now.
Totally. Rest in peace.
Oh, dog.
Yeah.
Dog. So you're right, though. So he gets arrested, and he does something that a lot of convicts do. There's like, I need a Bible. Yeah. Because his girlfriend, to her credit, I believe this is the first time we're going to use that, actually.
Girlfriend.
She said, I'm going to stay with you. Let's trust in Jesus, or, let's trust in our faith, and that will get us out to the other end.
And to his credit, it works for him. And it has worked for him ever since he was in prison and started to find religion.
I thought it was interesting. He said his name was Christian. His nickname was Christ. He invented the Christ era, but he had never opened up a Bible. So he had gotten into more of Asian religions like Buddhism and that kind of
Taoism,
shit. Taoism.
Like that, yeah.
And he said that he had just never opened one up. And when he opened it up, it
spoke to him, basically.
It spoke to him, yes,
yeah.
yes.
And he was able to basically turn his life around, and as this is happening, as he's turning himself around in prison, the skating community gets behind him. And people like Tony Hawk are advocating for his early release as far as him being in prison, which eventually comes.
Yep. So there was, I believe the Supreme Court ruled that the mandatory federal sentences were unconstitutional.
Yep.
And his lawyer was like, okay, in the next 6 months, we need to try and get a resentencing because we can get it reduced down to time served.
Yeah, basically time served, because he's been in there for like 5 years.
I believe he was in for 4.5. So yeah, it's literally like he was in prison in Hawaii for maybe in San Quentin.
Yeah, he was in California.
He was in California.
Yeah,
okay. So like that's what he was saying was just like it was so lucky for him to not spend another 5 years in prison. It was actually he kind of lucked out because the Supreme Court came out with this saying it was unconstitutional. I believe it went right back to what it was. So like he was in this small window of being lucky enough to get out.
It's like
and
serve 6 more months and you're done, basically.
To his credit, he has stayed on the path of Christianity and sobriety, which we're not religious in this podcast whatsoever, but for people that it helps, I am so for it.
That it helps, yeah. Not my cup of tea, but good on you for finding something.
I will never talk shit on somebody's faith that is beneficial to them. I'll talk shit on people's faith that are being pieces of shit.
Yeah.
But for him, you could tell it was just all joy and like this reemergence of life.
And he starts skating again. And he's, going to X Games and things like that after a long, awaited kind of time for him.
Yeah, so he goes to, I believe it was the 2007 X Games. It was the one where they had the first big air, and Danny Way goes up and does a Christ air just to kind of pay homage to this guy who influenced so many skaters to, like, for me, if I saw Tony Hawk doing 50 tricks, I'd just be like, okay, so I'm never going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Seeing Christian Hosoi just kind of like pump and go it, and you're like, well, I can kind of pump and go. I mean, I'm not going to get as high as him, but like I get the feeling of it.
Right.
And that's what I feel like he gave a lot of to skateboarding was this identity that you don't have to be this. You can be whatever you are.
You can be yourself.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's most important. And good for him for going down a good path now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just real quick, we didn't bring this up, and I have to bring it up because from 85 to 87, the Del Mar wars between him and Tony were probably, and people say this
Tony's home park,
was some of the most iconic because Christian would get cheered while Tony would get booed, and that was like literally at his home park, and that's what the difference between these guys were, who still had so much respect for each other, was like literally people would be booing Tony while they were cheering Christian, and then it flipped, and then
Yeah, but I mean, he went full Maximus and Gladiator, just like, are you not entertained?
No, seriously though, he's just like, no, I know this is your Caesar, but I'm here to win, and it's just that era of contest has to be brought up in this podcast because it was so important to vert skating. I mean, they exploded it for that late 80s, and then meth fucking ruined him. So, yeah.
Goddamn meth.
If you have any problems with drugs, please send them to us. All right. Thank you all very much.